Hare Krishna. Question: how does the act of marriage, the ritual of marriage, change sex from bad to good, from wrong to right? Why is premarital sex considered bad and marital sex considered okay? What does marriage do to transform the sex like the attitude towards sex like this? Answer: it's a matter of seeing all activities in life in the context of the ultimate purpose of life. When sex is seen primarily or exclusively as an act of pleasure, and then if pleasure is the purpose of life and there is no higher purpose as is conceived by most materialistic society today, then the question comes, what is the difference between premarital or marital or even extramarital sex? We want pleasure, and if there are consenting people, what's wrong with it? That's the question that comes up. So such a question, you know, every question comes from a particular worldview, and imposing the ideas of one worldview on another worldview doesn't work. So yeah, within this worldview, if if sex is for pleasure and there's nothing wrong in the pursuit of pleasure, whether it is in marriage or not marriage, then we have to see what is the consequence. And, the the Harvard Medical School did a survey of, and there are several surveys that have been done like this. There's a book American Paradox by Dr. David Mayer, and there also he talks about this, that the people who have casual sexual relationships, although they get some titillation, they actually feel very lonely because they don't develop a deep relationship with anyone, and they also feel guilty, not because they have some religious sense tormenting their conscience, but they simply feel that I am using others and others are using me, and it's a very dehumanizing form of relationship where one is just using another person to gratify one's desire, to fulfill one's itch. So basically, when sex is seen only as a tool for pleasure, then leave alone it for fulfilling it being harmonious with one's spiritual purpose in life, even with the purpose of having a lasting relationship, it becomes disharmonious and it leaves one lonely. But at the same time, because there is some pleasure over there, it becomes infatuating, addictive, and a person gets entangled in it completely. Quite often that happens when there's no sense of regulation. Now, the purpose of marriage, as I said, is to be seen in the context of the purpose of life. The materialistic worldview tells us that there is no purpose at all. We just are born, we live for some time and we die, and that's the end of it. Now we see everything in life as meaningful, and again the very fact here also, when we are asking, what is it that makes, say, marital sex okay and premarital extramarital sex wrong, that means we are asking what is the meaning. So within our life we look for meaning. Whatever happens, why did this person do like this? What is the meaning of this? We all try to have a sense of meaning, and we believe that life is meaningful, at least in the way we deal with events and we try to respond to events. And yet materialism leaves us with an ocean of meaninglessness in which we try to find out some small canals of meaning, some small islets where we get, okay, this event may be meaningful, this event may be meaningful like this, but overall life is left meaningless. And as I said, it doesn't bring any fulfillment to the heart also. So the Bhagavad-gita and the Gita wisdom tradition that offers us a spiritual worldview which tells us that we are at our core souls, and as souls we have an eternal relationship with God, and that relationship is the source of lasting happiness. So we have a vertical relationship with God, we have a horizontal relationship with people around us, and the purpose and perfection of life is to develop our eternal relationship with God and to attain eternal life with Him, in our identity, in our nature as spiritual beings, as souls. And everything that we do in life is meant to ultimately promote that purpose. So now the activity of sex is is one of the activities that induces spiritual forgetfulness the most, because sex is primarily a bodily activity, and the desire for sex, the activity of sex, the memory of sex, it all brings bodily consciousness. Now, we become aware of our bodies, we become aware of others' bodies, and we are not just aware, but we stay obsessed with those, and thus we can't stay spiritually conscious. And when, to the extent we are caught in pursuing bodily pleasure, sexual pleasure especially, to that extent our consciousness becomes locked towards the perception of spiritual happiness. Just as a person who is caught in watching a movie is not much aware of what is happening around in the room, is just completely caught in the movie. So like that we get caught in bodily consciousness, and we become oblivious to spiritual realities. So, because from the spiritual perspective, sex is so materially entangling for our consciousness, that's why there is regulation that is required. And this regulation is not a matter of deprivation of pleasure, because what the scriptures explain is that as souls we can have far greater happiness at the spiritual level. Now, no matter how glamorized the pleasure of sex may be in movies and novels, but the pleasure is limited. The body's capacity to enjoy is limited. The body's capacity to have pleasurable sensations around sex is all very limited. It just lasts for a few moments. The craving lasts for hours and years, but the actual experience ends in a few moments. So, rather than saying that by regulating sex we are depriving ourselves of pleasure, the reality is by obsessing with sex we are depriving ourselves of pleasure. Because by obsessing with sex we get only a few moments of pleasure, whatever is there in sex, but by obsessing with sex we deprive ourselves of the spiritual happiness that would be possible for us constantly if our consciousness were not so caught in sex, but were pure and spiritual, where we could perceive God, perceive Krishna and relish His bhakti. So now the purpose of regulation of sex is so that our consciousness can be gradually spiritualized and we can relish spiritual happiness eternally, more and more even in this life and thereafter also. So now, with this broad understanding of the relative values of material and spiritual happiness, we can understand the purpose of marriage. Purpose of marriage is that it brings about a regulation. Srila Prabhupada writes in the 18th chapter of Bhagavad-gita in one of his purport that the purpose of the marriage is to make the mind peaceful so that one can pursue spiritual life peacefully. That means the mind has a hyperactive imagination, especially with respect to sex. So in a regulated way, when the opportunity for gratification is provided, the mind says, okay, one realizes the mind is getting so excited about this, but there is nothing to be so wildly agitated about it. And that way gradually, when there is an avenue for full gratification, at the same time there is regulation, then the mind starts thinking, okay, is there any higher happiness? So instead of looking for material happiness, we start looking for spiritual happiness. If there is no regulation, then from this material pleasure, we go to the next material pleasure, to the next material pleasure, next material pleasure. Okay, with this person, my relationship did not work out, then maybe I'll try with some other person. This person is not all that good looking, that person is more good looking. And in that way, we just, when there is no regulation, then there is never any realization. There is no realization that it is not, the problem is not the relationship with this person, the problem is not this particular form of gratification. The problem is that material pleasure itself is unfulfilling. If there is no regulation, then we think that, okay, it didn't work out with this person, maybe it will work out with this. It didn't work out in this way, maybe it will work out in that way. And in that way, we get caught in material alternatives, and that's how we stay endlessly trapped. So regulation helps us to get realization that we need to look for pleasure other than material, and thus opens us towards seeking spiritual happiness. And further, even from the point of view of this world, actually the purpose of sex is procreation. there may be pleasure in it, but that pleasure is not the only purpose of sex, as is thought of in today's world. The primary purpose of sex is procreation, and when there is marriage, then the children that are born, there is a stable environment where within they can be taken care of. So Krishna says that Dharma viruddho bhuteshu kamosmi bharatarshava, that I am sex life that is not contrary to the principles of Dharma. This means that it is not sex itself that is taboo. It is sex that is divorced from the purpose of life and the purpose of sex itself. That is undesirable. So the purpose of life is ultimately to develop our eternal relationship with God and to have eternal happiness. So when sex is divorced from that, when sex itself is made into a purpose, into an obsession, then that is definitely undesirable. And while we are living in this world, we as humans, in fact all living beings procreate, and humans also we procreate, and that's how the human race goes on. So that purpose is there, and human beings, human infants especially, nature has made it in such a way that they need a lot of care. There are in some species the infant is just born and the infant just starts taking care of itself. In humans it doesn't work like that. The infants need a lot of support, and that support is offered through a family. So marriage, if marriage is seen merely as a tool for getting gratification, then there is nothing dharmic about that marriage. That simply is a legal marriage. But when the marriage is seen as a spiritual partnership, where two souls come together and together they try to develop their love for Krishna, and they also consider that they have an opportunity to get further souls into this world and to give them an opportunity to develop their relationship with Krishna, then that becomes sanctified and spiritualized. So when the marriage is divorced, so premarital sex or extramarital sex, this is all divorced from the purpose of life and even from the purpose of sex. And generally in premarital sex people want to do abortion, or people want to avoid children. Extramarital sex also, generally children, there's very little facility for taking care of children, and if the biblos are there, then taking care of them becomes difficult. Those children are proper home environment, and they are, even if they grow up, they are often stigmatized in society as illegitimate children, and a whole lot of problems come up. So therefore the purpose of marriage is to harmonize the activity of sex with the activity to harmonize the activity of sex with the purpose of life. When sex is divorced from marriage, then it leads to increasing illusion, increasing complication. Even at a material level, premarital affairs, extramarital affairs, they lead to a lot of agitation and complication. And from a spiritual perspective, they increase illusion, they increase bondage. And even from a human perspective, there is no deep relationship that develops. And that's why spiritually and materially, they are undesirable. Thank you.